have watched 3 civilizations collapse. Not slowly, not with dignity, but instantly, the way a fire dies when it is smothered. I watched the Keth surrender before our forward ships even reached weapons range. I watched the Solari broadcast a plea for mercy so early in the engagement that my crew laughed. They actually laughed. And I did not stop them, because we had not lost a single vessel in 14 consecutive campaigns. That was the Dominion's record. That was my record. My name is Veilcore. I hold the rank of High Commander in the Dominion expansion fleet, and I have spent 31 years pushing the borders of what we own deeper into regions of space that once belonged to someone else. I am not a cruel commander. I do not enjoy suffering. What I enjoy is efficiency. A campaign that ends in total submission within a standard cycle is an efficient campaign. A species that recognizes the size of the force standing against them and lays down their arms is a species that has made a rational decision. I respect that. I have always respected that. What I encountered at the edge of the Orion Spur was not that. Our charts listed the region as low priority. Thin star density. No known advanced civilizations. 1 inhabited system of note, the 3rd planet from a yellow star, populated by a species our researchers call Terrans. Bipedal. Short-lived. Their recorded history barely stretched back 3,000 years. Their fastest ships could not match our slowest. Their weapons technology was described in our briefing files as developing, localized, non-threatening. The analyst who wrote that report is probably still employed. I imagine she has never stood on a command bridge and watched what I watched. We arrived with 64 ships, cruisers, destroyers, 2 fleet carriers, and a command vessel. I had used this formation to conquer larger systems than this. The formation was designed to project an image as much as a threat. When a civilization saw 64 Dominion vessels hanging in their sky, the image alone usually did the work. The broadcast would go out. Silence would follow for a day or 2 while their leaders argued among themselves. Then someone sensible would open a channel. We sent the broadcast during the 4th hour after arrival. It was the same transmission we always used, translated into every known Terran language. The message was clear. It listed our previous campaigns. It named the civilizations that had submitted and prospered under Dominion administration. It explained the alternative. The tone was not threatening. It was simply factual. Sometimes facts are more frightening than threats. Then we waited. The first day passed without a response. The second day passed without a response. My fleet intelligence officer, a calm and experienced analyst named Cord Halley, told me this was unusual, but not unprecedented. Some species needed time to process the scale of what they were facing. Some governments argued internally. Some simply had slow communication networks. I told him I agreed. I did not tell him that the silence was making the back of my neck feel strange. On the 3rd day, I walked the length of my command ship twice. I reviewed the star charts. I reread the Terran intelligence files, all of them, including the supplemental reports from our advanced scouts who had passed through this sector 8 months earlier. The scouts had noted several debris fields, a small number of active vessels patrolling the outer system, and what appeared to be mining infrastructure on 2 outer moons. Nothing alarming. Nothing that changed any calculation. On the 4th day, during the 6th hour, a contact appeared on our forward sensors. It emerged from a debris field roughly 40,000 kilometers off our starboard bow. The debris field itself was listed in our charts as the remnant of a natural collision event. 2 planetoids that had shattered against each other sometime within the last century. The field was thick with rock and frozen gas clouds, the kind of place that was difficult to scan clearly and easy to disappear inside. Our sensor officer flagged the contact immediately. It was a single vessel. My first thought was that it was a scout. My second thought was that it was a messenger, some small diplomatic ship sent to begin negotiations from a cautious distance. My third thought came when the ship's profile resolved on my display, and I realized it was neither of those things. It was a warship, destroyer class by size, though its exact configuration did not match any Terran vessel profile in our database. The hull was wrong in several places. Sections of armor plating appeared newer than others, mismatched, uneven, replaced after damage. The ship carried visible scoring along its port side, the kind of long, deep scar left by a weapon strike at close range. This vessel had seen combat recently enough that the repairs were still unfinished. It did not accelerate toward us. It did not flee. It held position directly ahead of our fleet at a distance that placed it well inside our weapons range, but outside any defensive engagement envelope that made tactical sense. It simply sat there in open space between a debris field and the largest fleet it had ever had reason to encounter. I waited for the charge. When a small vessel positions itself in front of an overwhelmingly superior force with no apparent plan, the most common outcome is a final symbolic attack, a gesture of defiance. I have seen it before. I understand it, actually. There is something in certain species that would rather end on their own terms than submit. So I waited. The charge never came. Instead, a hailing frequency opened. My communications officer looked up from her console with an expression I had never seen on her face before. She was not alarmed. She was uncertain, which was worse. She said the vessel was broadcasting on our standard command frequency in perfect Dominion standard, using correct protocol formatting, as if the person on the other end had studied our communication procedures and simply decided to use them. I told her to put it through. The voice was clear. No distortion. No background noise of a crew in panic. It was a female voice, low, calm, and unhurried, carrying the specific quality some commanders develop after years of making decisions under pressure. The quality of someone who has already run the numbers and arrived at a strange kind of calm on the other side of them. She said, "This is UES Enduring. You are now in contested space. I suggest you reconsider." That was all. No threat. No list of forces waiting behind her. No passionate speech about her people's right to exist. No request for terms. Just a statement and a suggestion, delivered in the tone of someone giving directions. My bridge fell silent. Cord Halley looked at me. My weapons officer looked at me. Even the young sensor operator in the far corner of the bridge had turned around in her seat. They were all waiting to see how I would respond, because none of them had a framework for this either. I had held the Dominion's record of unbroken forward expansion for more than 3 decades. I had never been told to reconsider anything by a single ship with a damaged hull and a crew that could not have numbered more than 50. I looked at the vessel on my display. It had not moved. It was still there, sitting between us and everything behind it, showing no sign of moving aside. I lowered myself into my command chair. "Hold our advance," I said. Halley repeated the order to the fleet without comment. The 64 ships in our formation matched velocity and held position. Out in front of us, across 40,000 kilometers of empty space, the single battered warship did not react. It did not power up its weapons. It did not shift position in either relief or preparation. It simply remained where it was, as if it had always intended to be there and saw no reason to change that decision. I stared at it for a long time. I do not use the word unsettled lightly. I have faced weapons capable of splitting moons. I have received reports that entire task forces under my command had been destroyed. I have looked at death from many different angles, and none of them unsettled me the way that single quiet, damaged ship did in that moment. Because it was not attacking me. It was not begging me. It was not even negotiating with me. It was simply refusing to move, and I had absolutely no idea what to do about that. 3 years before she parked the Enduring between a debris field and the largest fleet she had ever seen, Commander Yara Collins had spent 9 days trapped inside a collapsed mine shaft on Kepler Station 4, surviving on protein paste from an emergency ration tin while listening to the sounds of a Dominion advanced scout vessel conducting systematic scans of the colony above her. She did not panic during those 9 days. She planned. She reviewed everything she knew about Dominion scanning technology and correctly concluded that the rock composition of the shaft walls, packed with dents or deposits, was thick enough to partially mask a human biosignature. She rationed the protein paste carefully, stretching it to last 11 days in case she needed the extra margin. She slept in 4-hour cycles and kept a mental record of every sound she heard from the surface, cataloging what she could identify and flagging what she could not. On the 6th day, she identified the engine signature of the scout vessel as a Dominion Type 7 light reconnaissance craft, which she knew from pre-service training carried a maximum crew of 12 and a weapons payload designed for observation, not prolonged combat. On the 9th day, the scout ship left. She climbed out of the shaft and found the colony mostly intact, though 6 of the outer storage facilities had been marked with Dominion survey tags, which meant a larger vessel would eventually return to evaluate the site for resource extraction. She filed a report. She submitted her sensor notes on the Type 7 craft. She requested that the outer system picket line in this sector be reviewed and reinforced. The request was acknowledged. It was never acted upon. That was how Yara Collins understood the situation 3 years later when she sat in the captain's chair of the UES Enduring and watched 64 Dominion warships fill the forward display like a curtain being drawn across the sky. She had not always been captain of the Enduring. The ship had belonged to Commander Peter Hale until 16 months earlier, when Peter was reassigned to Fleet Command on New Bristol, a promotion he absolutely deserved. The reassignment left Yara in temporary command of a 30-year-old destroyer with a crew of 43 and a picket assignment in a sector most of Fleet Command treated as a formality. The Enduring's job was simple: watch, log contacts, and report. She was never supposed to engage anything larger than a patrol vessel. She had found the ship in better condition than its age suggested. The previous engineering crew had been obsessive about maintenance, and the current team was no less devoted. Chief Engineer Owen Clark treated every system aboard the Enduring as a personal responsibility. He was 42 years old, originally from Cardiff, and he possessed the specific kind of personality that genuinely became happier when something was broken, because a broken thing was simply a problem waiting for a solution. He had extended the operational life of the Enduring's primary drive coils by 14 months using a repair process he invented himself and documented in a handwritten notebook he carried in his chest pocket. The weapons officer was Lieutenant Nora Vance. She had requested the posting personally. Her previous assignment had been aboard a heavy cruiser in the inner systems, far from the frontier and deep inside established patrol zones where nothing ever happened and nothing was expected to happen. She had transferred herself away from safety on purpose. Yara had read her transfer request during intake review and approved it immediately, because the reason Nora gave was simple: I want to be closer to where the decisions get made. That was the kind of thinking Yara understood. The youngest crew member with a named station was Navigator Eli Ford, 24 years old. He had never experienced a combat engagement. His record was completely clean, his training scores were strong, and he had a habit of making handwritten notes on the physical star charts he kept at his station, even though digital charts had long since become standard. Yara had realized early on that Eli was the kind of person who needed to physically feel that things were real before he could act on them. The handwritten notes were how he made space feel real. She had decided that was perfectly fine. When the Dominion fleet appeared on the forward sensors, Eli had been the one to announce it. His voice had not cracked. He reported the contact numbers clearly and calmly, then turned to look at Yara for exactly 1 second before facing his display again. She appreciated that second. It told her he was frightened, but functional. She could work with frightened and functional. The fleet consisted of 64 ships. The Enduring was one. The math was not the kind Yara enjoyed calculating, but she calculated it anyway because that was what she had been trained to do, and because there was a certain practical comfort in knowing exactly how bad a situation truly was instead of leaving yourself to guess. The situation was very bad. Running was the obvious answer, and she spent roughly 30 seconds genuinely considering it. If she fled immediately at maximum drive output, she could reach the communications relay at the edge of the system in approximately 9 hours. She could transmit the contact report from there. That was mission protocol. That was exactly what she was supposed to do. Then she thought about the route behind her. The inner colonies were 6 jump points deep, populated, unprepared. Fleet Command had reinforcements available, but they were not positioned for rapid deployment to this sector because this sector was never expected to require them. If she ran now and the Dominion fleet followed, they would not pursue at her speed. They would move at their own pace because they had no reason to hurry. They would reach the first junction point, then the second, then the third, and by the time Fleet Command assembled a proper response, the Dominion would already be inside the defensive perimeter. She thought about 9 days trapped in a mine shaft. She thought about survey tags painted onto storage buildings. She thought about the way a civilization that had been conquering worlds for 1,000 years moved when it had absolutely no reason to slow down. Then she stopped thinking about all of that and started working. "Nora," she said, "I want every active broadcast channel we have open and transmitting. Stack the signals. Make us sound like a command vessel coordinating fleet traffic." Nora looked at her for exactly as long as it took to understand what she was being asked to do. Then she said, "Yes, Commander," and immediately got to work. "Owen," Yara said over the internal channel, "I need you inside the debris field on our starboard side. There's a wreck in there, a Dominion ghost ship from the advanced scout wave about 8 months ago. I need to know if its core systems still have anything left in them." Owen's voice came back carrying the same energy he always brought to damaged machinery. "I saw it on the scan," he said. "Already thinking about it." "Eli," she said, "plot me a holding position inside the outer debris layer. Not through it, just inside the edge, where we can maintain position and force their sensors to work harder for a clean lock." "Plotting now," Eli replied, his hands already moving across the controls. Yara opened the Dominion command frequency. She had studied the protocol formatting from intelligence files. She entered the proper authentication sequence, which was not difficult to imitate because the Dominion had been using the same foundational code structure for at least 40 years. That told her something important about a civilization that had not faced a serious enough challenge to adapt in a very long time. She sent the hail. When the channel opened and she heard the specific kind of silence that meant someone on the other side was listening carefully, she said exactly what she had already decided she would say before transmitting. There was no reason to complicate it. "This is UES Enduring. You are now in contested space. I suggest you reconsider." Then she closed the channel. The fleet did not advance. Yara allowed herself exactly 3 seconds to acknowledge that fact. 3 seconds was not much time, but it was enough. The fleet had stopped. That meant the voice on the other end had carried her message to someone with authority, and that someone had made the decision not to push forward, at least not immediately. It was not a victory. It was a pause. But a pause was something she could use. "Owen," she said, "tell me about the ghost ship." His voice answered from somewhere deep inside a maintenance crawlspace in the lower hull, and he sounded genuinely pleased. "The core isn't dead," Owen said. "The primary drive is gone, but the reactor casing held. There's still residual charge in the capacitor bank. Not enough to power anything, but enough to create a signature if we induce it externally. I can rig a tether line and pulse it on a timer. Make it look like something in there is running quiet. How long to set it up? For hours if everything cooperates. You have 3. There was a brief silence after that. Yara looked at the forward display. The Dominion fleet was still there, still holding position. She could already see scout ships along the edge of the formation beginning to adjust their trajectories. Small movements, the kind that meant someone was considering sending them forward to investigate. She had roughly 3 hours before this situation turned into a completely different kind of problem. She intended to use every minute of them. The debris field was dense enough to distort thermal readings, and with the Enduring positioned just inside the outer layer, the ship's heat signature blended into the irregular thermal patterns radiating from the surrounding rock fragments. It was not perfect concealment. It was sufficient concealment. There was a difference, and Yara had learned long ago how to survive in the space between those two things. She pulled up the intelligence files on Dominion tactical doctrine while Nora continued layering broadcast signals and Eli quietly confirmed their new holding position within the debris field. The files were incomplete. They had been assembled from observation reports, fragments of intercepted Dominion communications, and accounts from the 2 known species that had encountered the Dominion before eventually losing contact entirely. Those reports were not comfortable reading, but Yara had spent most of her career reading uncomfortable things. What stood out to her was the pattern. The Dominion did not improvise. They followed a sequence because the sequence had always worked. Broadcast, wait, advance, occupy. It was efficient, and given their history it made perfect sense. But it was also built on one critical assumption, that the opposition would behave predictably. Flee. Fight directly. Request terms. Collapse under pressure. Yara intended to do none of those things. She was going to make the debris field feel full of decisions she had already made. And she was going to make those decisions seem extremely expensive to test. Nora looked up from her station. Commander, one of their scout units is separating from the main formation. Yara turned her attention to the tactical display. One ship was moving toward the outer edge of the debris field at a cautious pace, scanning continuously as it advanced. She leaned back slightly in her chair and watched it approach. "Let it come," she said. "We're not finished setting the table yet." Owen's voice echoed through the internal channel from somewhere deep below deck. "Commander, I'm going to need power from the secondary coupling to finish this. It'll pull about 8% from maneuvering reserves." "Take it," Yara replied. "Pulling it now." The scout ship continued forward, slow and deliberate, its sensor arrays sweeping the debris field in long, methodical arcs. Yara watched the scanning pattern carefully and counted the timing between sweeps. There was a rhythm to it. 12 seconds between each full rotation. That meant there was a 12-second window during every cycle when the leading edge of the debris layer was not under direct scan. She memorized the number immediately. She did not need to write it down. In her mind, she was building something piece by piece, the same way Owen built repairs inside his notebooks. Methodical, precise, not fast, because speed was not what this moment demanded. What this moment required was patience that looked, from the outside, exactly like confidence. Yara Collins was very good at that. The Dominion scout ship reached the outer edge of the debris field and slowed even further. It was close enough now for her to identify clearly on the tactical display. Type 9. Newer than the vessel she had hidden from beneath Kepler Station 4. Faster. Better sensors. Probably a crew of 20. She watched it pause at the edge of the field. It did not enter. And in that moment, watching the hesitation of a Dominion scout ship that had undoubtedly been ordered forward by a commander with 63 additional warships behind him, Yara Collins understood something important. She was not the only person in this situation who felt uncertain. She was simply the only one who had decided uncertainty was a tool instead of a weakness. She stored that thought away and continued watching. The ghost ship drifting inside the debris field no longer had a name. Whatever it had once been called had disappeared along with the crew who gave it that name. What remained was a hollow shell of scorched metal and silent systems, and the crew of the Enduring had quietly adopted it as the third participant in a plan that was still taking shape. Owen Clark had never worked on a Dominion vessel before. He had studied them casually over the years, the way any engineer studies the machinery of a potential enemy, skimming technical profiles during spare moments and quietly appreciating the design philosophies that differed from human engineering. Dominion ships were built for mass and endurance. Human ships were built for speed and adaptability. You could see it in the way their systems were arranged. Dominion hardware was dense and layered, designed to keep functioning after catastrophic damage. Human systems were lighter, modular, easier to replace. Owen pulled himself through a narrow breach in the ghost ship's hull using a tether line, moving hand over hand through the weightless silence of the debris field with a handheld sensor unit strapped to his forearm and a tool bag secured to his belt. The breach was tight enough that he had to angle himself sideways to fit through it. He scraped his left shoulder against a jagged edge of torn metal and barely noticed. There was no time to care. Inside, the ship was completely dark except for the emergency indicator light on his suit and the faint amber glow coming from the only system that still retained power, the capacitor bank. It sat in the engineering section 3 decks below the breach, and Owen navigated toward it through instinct, memory, and the rough structural schematics he had downloaded from the intelligence files before leaving the Enduring. The capacitor bank was a row of thick cylindrical units, each about a meter tall, mounted in a frame that ran the length of one wall. They were designed to store electrical charge for the drive systems, and most of them were depleted, but 3 were not. 3 still held residual charge from whatever the ship had been doing in its final moments before it was abandoned, and those 3 were enough. He had rigged a pulse trigger using components from his tool bag and a length of conductive wire he had unspooled from a wall panel. The trigger was set to fire in a repeating cycle. Charge pulse. Pause. Charge pulse. Pause. Irregular enough to suggest a system running at low power, yet regular enough to produce a consistent sensor return. It was, he thought, a convincing imitation of a powered vessel in minimal standby mode, which was exactly what they needed anyone scanning the field from outside to believe they were seeing. He had finished with 11 minutes to spare. Back on the Enduring, he reported completion to the commander and then went directly to the drive coupling that needed attention because the 8% he had pulled from the maneuvering reserves had placed stress on the secondary distribution line, and a stress line was a line that would eventually fail. And Owen Clark did not allow lines to fail on his ship. The ship belonged to him in a way that it did not quite belong to anyone else. The commander commanded it. The crew operated it. But Owen kept it alive, and that was a different kind of ownership, quieter and more constant. He was halfway through checking the distribution line when Nora Vance's voice came over the internal channel. "Owen, the commander wants you up front. Something is moving." He secured the panel and moved immediately. On the bridge, Yara was watching the tactical display with the focused stillness she always had whenever she was thinking faster than she was speaking. The Dominion scout ship that had been hovering at the edge of the debris field was now moving, not away from the field, but into it. "It entered the field 40 seconds ago," Nora said. "Moving slowly. Sensor sweeps are active." Yara looked at Owen as he arrived. "The pulse trigger. What is the broadcast interval?" 9 seconds on, 4 off with a 2-second variance built in, he answered. "Randomized variance. It will not repeat the same pattern twice in a row." "Good." She looked back at the display. "The scout is heading toward the ghost ship. It will reach sensor proximity in approximately 12 minutes. Owen understood immediately. If it gets close enough to resolve the signal clearly, it will see the source is a dead hull. The trick ends. "Yes," Yara said. "So we need the trick to do something before that happens." She explained what she needed. Owen listened carefully, then asked only one question. "How much charge is left in the capacitor bank if I fire the pulse trigger manually at maximum output?" "I would estimate about 20% of what we used for the timer setup," he said. "Not much, but enough for one full discharge if we trigger all 3 capacitors at once instead of cycling them. Enough to create an electromagnetic burst." Owen considered it properly. The burst would be significant, probably within a radius of 400 to 500 meters. It would not penetrate heavy shielding. He paused. But a scout ship at close range, with its sensor arrays fully deployed. Those arrays were not shielded at the sensor ends. They could not be. Shielding would block the signals they were trying to read. If the arrays were active when the burst fired, the overload would cascade backward through the entire sensor system. The scout would be effectively blind for a considerable amount of time. Yara nodded. "How long?" 30 minutes. Possibly 40. The components are not something they carry spares for on a scout vessel. They would have to return to the main fleet for repairs. "Can you trigger the full discharge remotely from here?" "I can if the tether line is still connected." "Is it?" He checked his suit's connector status on the panel beside the bridge door. "Yes." "Then I need you to watch the scout's position on the display and fire the full discharge the moment it reaches maximum sensor range of the ghost ship. Not before. Not after. The exact moment its arrays are pointed directly at the source." Owen looked at the tactical display. The scout was moving at a measured pace, sweeping as it advanced. He tracked its vector. He calculated the range at which its sensors would focus most tightly on the ghost ship, the point of maximum signal resolution, which was also the point of maximum vulnerability for an array receiving a sudden electromagnetic burst. "I'll need a countdown from Eli," he said. Eli Ford, seated at the navigation station, had already been listening. He was already plotting the scout's speed and trajectory. "I can give you a 60-second warning and a 10-second countdown," he said without being asked. "That works," Owen replied. He moved to the tether control panel at the rear of the bridge and stood in front of it with his hand near the manual discharge trigger. The bridge fell quiet. Everyone was watching something. The display, their instruments, or the slow progress of a Dominion scout ship moving through a field of broken rock toward a dead vessel pretending to breathe. 9 minutes passed. 60 seconds, Eli said. Owen placed his hand on the trigger, not pressing it, just resting there. On the display, the scout continued its approach. Its sensor sweeps had shortened in interval, which meant it was focusing. It had found something worth examining. The ghost ship's pulse signal was drawing it in, which had always been the plan. And the plan was working, which was the only part of the situation Owen found comforting. 30 seconds, Eli said. Yara had not moved from her position. She watched the display with the same expression she wore whenever she was listening to something she had not yet decided about. 10, Eli said. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Owen pressed the trigger. The tether line carried the discharge signal in less than a second, and 3 capacitors that had been waiting 8 months to do something finally did it all at once. On the display, the scout ship went from an active scanning pattern to a complete stop in about 2 seconds. Its sensor returns, which had been regular and strong on Nora's monitoring display, simply vanished. The ship itself was physically intact. It had not been hit. Nothing visible had happened to it. It had simply lost the ability to see. The bridge remained silent for a moment. Then Eli said, very carefully and with obvious effort to keep his voice neutral, "The scout is no longer advancing. It has stopped moving." Owen checked the tether line status. The connection was still active, but the capacitors were completely drained. The ghost ship was dark again, properly dark this time, with nothing left to power it. It was only wreckage now, which was all it had ever truly been, but it had been useful wreckage. And Owen felt a small but genuine respect for it. "The scout is reversing course," Nora said. "It is moving back toward the main fleet." On the Dominion Fleet Command Bridge, Velker was staring at a scout ship that had entered a debris field, lost all sensor functionality from an unknown source, and was now limping back toward formation with its arrays offline. His fleet intelligence officer, Cordy, stood beside him, and for once, Hallie had nothing analytical to offer. He simply watched the same display in silence. Velker spoke quietly. "Open a direct channel to the Terran vessel." The channel opened. He was careful with his tone. He had built a 31-year career on being careful with his tone. "I would like to speak with your commanding officer," he said. Yara's voice returned immediately, as though she had already been waiting for him to speak. There was a pause one Velker chose to use deliberately. "You are aware," he said, "of the size of this fleet." "I am," she replied. "You are aware of what we have done to civilizations far more prepared than yours." "I have read the files," she said. "Yes." Another pause followed. He was making a calculation, and he knew she understood that he was making it. Worse, he suspected she had already calculated what his conclusion would be, which was an unsettling thought to have about someone commanding a single worn-out ship. Finally, he asked, "How many vessels do you actually have in this system?" There was a beat of silence, exactly the right length. Not too long, which would suggest deception. Not too short, which would suggest no thought at all. Then she answered, "Enough." He closed the channel. Cordy, standing beside him, spoke carefully. "Commander, from a pure intelligence standpoint, we cannot confirm the presence of any additional vessels in this system beyond the one. The debris field is interfering with our scans, but the mass readings do not suggest." "I know what the mass readings suggest," Velker interrupted. He said it without anger. Hallie was correct. The mass readings probably told the truth. The single ship in front of them was probably alone. Probably. He looked back at the display. He thought about the scout ship now being guided back through formation with its sensor arrays disabled. He thought about the ghost ship signal that had drawn it in, the signal that had appeared and then conveniently disappeared as if whatever created it had decided its purpose had been fulfilled. He thought about the command frequency, correctly formatted and perfectly timed. He thought about the voice that had delivered a single sentence and then waited with the patience of something that had already decided it belonged there, regardless of what he chose to do. He thought about 31 years of campaigns against civilizations that had all behaved in ways he could understand. "Hold the advance," he said again. He walked to the observation deck at the rear of the command bridge and stood looking out at the debris field. Somewhere within it was a destroyed vessel that may or may not have been responsible for the scout ship sensor failure. Somewhere along the outer edge of the field was a Terran warship that was either alone or not alone, and somehow the answer to that question had become the most important uncertainty in the entire sector. He had not felt uncertain in a very long time. He stood there for almost an hour watching the field, and the field returned nothing except the slow drift of rock and frozen gas, and the faint warmth of a yellow star burning patiently behind it all. Then his communications officer spoke. "Commander, priority signal from Fleet High Command. Admiral Drays is en route to this sector." Velker turned away from the observation window. He knew exactly what that meant. Everyone on the bridge knew what it meant. Admiral Drays did not arrive at situations that were under control. She arrived at situations that were not being resolved quickly enough. He looked at the display one more time. The single Terran vessel was still there, still motionless. He did not know what was going to happen next. He was beginning to suspect the Terran commander did. The message Yara Collins sent during the 14th hour of the standoff was not sent to the Dominion. It was sent to her navigator. The instruction was written by hand on a physical card she filled out at her station. She folded it once, carried it across the bridge herself, and placed it silently into Eli Ford's left hand. Eli opened the card and read it. Then he looked up at her. "You know what that means?" she asked. "Yes, Commander," he answered. The card read, "Take everything we have collected, every sensor log, every frequency intercept, every behavioral observation. Package it for the escape pod. You leave at my order. You do not wait for a second order, and you do not come back for me. You take the data to Fleet Command. That is the mission. That is the only mission." Eli folded the card and slipped it into his jacket pocket. He said nothing else. He simply turned back to his station and continued working. That was the moment Yara fully understood that she trusted him. Not because he argued, asked questions, or tried to reassure her, but because he did not. The data package he would carry was the most important thing currently aboard the Enduring. Not the ship itself. Not even the crew. It was the 40 hours of intelligence they had gathered on Dominion fleet formations, response times, sensor protocols, communication patterns, and behavioral tendencies under pressure. It was proof that the Dominion could be made to hesitate, made to doubt, made to hold position because of things it did not understand. That information, in the hands of Fleet Command, would change how humanity prepared. It might even determine whether humanity survived. Nora Vance knew nothing about the card. She was working. Nora was almost always working. Since the standoff began, she had categorized every Dominion vessel in the fleet by class and estimated payload. She had built a rough tactical overlay of their formation geometry and identified 3 specific points where the spacing between ships created coverage gaps. She had done all of it without being asked because she was the kind of person who believed that preparing for something was not the same as planning to do it, and that knowing was always better than not knowing. She brought her formation analysis to Yara during the 22nd hour. Yara studied it for a long time. The 3 coverage gaps Nora identified were real. One of them was particularly interesting. Near the rear center of the Dominion formation, there was a cluster of ships grouped more tightly than the others. Behind that cluster, partially shielded by the mass of the warships, was a vessel Yara recognized from the intelligence files as a fleet logistics ship, a fuel and munitions tender. The Dominion kept those vessels close to combat formations during extended operations, which made tactical sense, but it also meant they had placed something extremely large and extremely flammable inside the formation itself. The coverage gap near that vessel was not large. Roughly 60 degrees of arc, perhaps 20 seconds wide at the Enduring's maximum sprint speed. Under normal circumstances, no single destroyer would even consider attempting it. Under normal circumstances, a single destroyer would not be here at all. Yara kept studying the overlay in silence. "The railgun," she finally said. "It can fire once before the coils burn out." Nora nodded. "We have kept them charged since hour 2. One shot. If I gave you a 60-degree approach window at sprint speed, could you put a slug through that gap and hit the tender?" Nora did not answer immediately. She returned to her station and ran the calculation. She ran it 3 separate times, not because she was uncertain, but because she wanted to be honest about the margins. Then she came back. "Yes," she said. The angle is not ideal, but at sprint speed the approach geometry lines up. One shot. I can make it. Yara nodded but said nothing else about it. Not yet. There was still one more piece of information she needed. It arrived during the 28th hour when Nora intercepted a Dominion internal transmission that Owen, who had been teaching himself basic Dominion signal protocol from the intelligence files during spare moments, managed to partially translate. Admiral Drays was not merely en route. She was less than 30 hours away, and the tone of the signal suggested she had already been briefed on the situation and had already decided how she intended to handle it. Based on what Yara knew about Drays from the intelligence files, her approach would be very different from Velker's. Velker had paused. He had waited. He had communicated carefully, like someone trying to understand what stood in front of him. Drays, according to every record Yara had access to, did not pause. Drays finished things. At the 29th hour, Yara gathered the crew together. It was not a formal briefing. She simply called all 43 of them into the small common area near the bridge and told them what she knew. She told them about Drays. She told them about the 30-hour window. She told them what she was considering. What she did not tell them was that she had already made her decision. She allowed them to speak. Some asked questions. Some raised concerns, which she answered honestly. Owen asked a specific engineering question about the sprint approach, and she answered it just as specifically. Nora stood quietly to one side with her arms folded, which Yara recognized as Nora's settled posture. The stance she took when she had already made up her mind and was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. At the end, Yara said, "I am not ordering anyone to agree with this. I am telling you what I am going to do. If any of you believe the escape pod is a better use of your time when the moment comes, I will not fault you for it." No one moved toward the pod. She had not expected them to, but she had meant every word she said, and they knew she meant it. That was the reason they stayed. At the 30th hour, she sent Eli to prepare the data package. He worked through the entire night cycle with meticulous focus, organizing the sensor logs in sequence and adding a handwritten summary on 3 sheets of paper from his personal notebook supply because he wanted whoever opened that pod to understand the context before they even touched a display. At the 31st hour, Nora confirmed that the Dominion fleet had shifted slightly in formation. Not an advance, just an adjustment, the kind of subtle preparation fleets made before a senior commander arrived and changed the orders. At the 32nd hour, Yara sat alone on the bridge for 20 minutes in the silence of the ship. She was not afraid. She had been afraid before. She knew what fear felt like, and this was not it. This was something quieter and heavier, the specific weight of a decision that had already been made and was now simply waiting for the moment to arrive. She opened the ship's log and recorded a complete mission report. She spoke clearly and without hurry. She named every crew member and their contribution. She described every decision she had made and the reasoning behind each one. She described the Dominion fleet in detail, the formation patterns, the behavioral signals, and the specific pause that had revealed that uncertainty was possible even in something as large and confident as a 1,000-year empire. She described the ghost ship and what Owen had done with it. She described the scout ship and the moment it had gone dark. She described Velker's voice on the open channel, which had been, she wrote, the voice of someone starting to think for the first time in a very long while. "I do not know how this ends for this ship," she said in the log. "I know how I intend it to end for everything behind it. That is enough." She saved the log to the escape pod's data package. At the 33rd hour, Eli came to the bridge and confirmed the package was ready. At the 34th hour, Nora reported that the Dominion formation was reconfiguring. Not a patrol shift, an advance formation. Drays had arrived early. Yara looked at the display. The 64 ships were moving, not quickly yet, but the geometry was changing. The formation was tightening into an assault configuration, which was different from Velker's holding pattern. It told her the person now giving orders was not interested in uncertainty. She watched the tender ship settle into its protected position exactly where Nora's overlay had predicted. "Eli," she said. He turned from his station. "Go," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He picked up the physical star chart from his station, the one covered in handwritten notes, and placed it carefully into his jacket. Then he said, "Commander." It was not the start of a sentence. It was the whole thing. And he left. The pod launched at the 34th hour and 20 minutes. On the Dominion fleet display, it appeared as a small fast-moving contact breaking from the Enduring's position and accelerating toward the inner system. Yara watched it go until it became indistinguishable from the surrounding stars. Then she looked at Nora. Nora was already at her weapons console, hands ready, posture settled. "Sprint course," Yara said. "You have your window." Owen's voice came through from engineering. "Drive coils at 100%. Ready." The Enduring moved. It did not ease into speed. It went from holding position to sprint velocity in 4 seconds. Every gram of performance Owen had spent 16 months building pushed to its limit. The ship vibrated with it. A deep physical hum that traveled through the deck and into Yara's feet. She had always loved that feeling. The feeling of a ship giving everything it had. And she was glad she could feel it now. The Dominion formation reacted immediately. Sensor locks snapped onto the Enduring from 12 directions. Weapons systems powered up. Targeting alerts lit Nora's display. 60 seconds to window, Nora said. The Enduring was in the open now. No debris field. No cover. Just speed, direction, and 43 people who had made a decision together 32 hours ago. A Dominion warship on the left edge of the formation broke formation and moved to intercept. Owen called the bearing from engineering. Yara adjusted course by 3 degrees, opening the gap and buying the intercept ship 8 more seconds of travel time. 20 seconds, Nora said. Window in 5. The Dominion weapons were charged. Multiple targeting solutions tracked the Enduring. The only reason none had fired yet was that the ship was moving through the formation geometry in a way that made clean firing solutions temporarily unsafe, forcing hesitation for just long enough to matter. Window, Nora said. She fired. The railgun discharged once. The coils burned out immediately after, exactly as predicted. The smell of overheated metal filled the bridge through the ventilation system, and the Enduring shuddered with the recoil of a weapon designed for a much larger vessel being fired from a much smaller one. The slug crossed the distance in under 2 seconds and struck the logistics tender directly in its forward storage section. The explosion was not small. The tender carried fuel reserves for 43 ships and munitions for roughly half of them. When those stores ignited together, the resulting detonation generated a pressure wave that tore outward through space and slammed into the nearest Dominion warships, disrupting systems and forcing emergency maneuvers. The rear center of the formation collapsed into chaos. Ships scattered. Collision warnings flared across the fleet as the tight assault configuration fractured under its own instability. The advance stopped. Not permanently, but it stopped. Hard about, Yara said. Owen pushed the drives for everything they had left. It was less than before. One of the coil conduits had cracked under sprint stress, but it was enough. Enough to turn fast. Enough to run. Damage reports were already coming in. The Enduring had taken a glancing weapons hit somewhere between the tender's explosion and the present moment, likely from an automated point defense system. The aft section had a breach. The crew in that compartment had already sealed it and were reporting in. All accounted for. That was the only number Yara cared about right now. She opened the ship-wide channel. Her voice stayed steady, not raised, not softened. Hull breach aft compartment 4. All personnel not at stations move to secure sections. Owen, report on the breach when you have it. Working on it now, Owen replied. Nora's voice followed almost immediately. Commander, open communication channel. It's Velker. Yara hesitated for less than a second. She was already running calculations, breach status, drive conduit stability, distance to the debris field, and the time remaining before the Dominion formation recovered enough to pursue effectively. Then she took the call. Velker did not speak at first. When he did, his voice was different. Not emotional, but something more complicated than emotion. Cease fire. All units, cease fire. Yara realized immediately he was not speaking to her. He was speaking to his own fleet. A second voice cut in, sharp and absolute. Commander Velker, you do not have authority to issue that order. Velker answered, I am giving the Terran crew time to reach their escape pods. Anyone who fires on that vessel within the next 5 minutes is answerable to me. The sharp voice replied, You are relieved of command, Valker. There was a pause. Then Valker said simply, Yes, not like surrender, like acceptance. The channel went quiet, filled only with the distant operational noise of a fleet momentarily frozen by conflicting orders. Yara did not slow the ship. She did not know how long those 5 minutes would actually hold. Full speed to the debris field, she said. The Enduring ran. The crew reached sealed compartments. Owen patched the aft breach himself in under 3 minutes using clamps and repair foam, working with the controlled precision of someone who had prepared for exactly this kind of failure for years. The ship reached the outer edge of the debris field. Yara cut speed and guided them into it, threading between drifting rock and fractured metal. The cracked conduit still held. The ship was still alive, still hers. She did not look back. Not yet. Outside, the stars remained unchanged, cold, indifferent. They brought me to the tribunal on a transport vessel that smelled of recycled air and sterilizing chemicals, the distinct odor of a Dominion administrative facility in constant operation for too long. I had sat in rooms like this before, always on the other side, always the one being evaluated, reviewed, measured. I sat at the tribunal table, placed my hands flat on the surface, and looked at the 7 members of the Dominion Expansion Authority Judicial Panel. Then I told them the truth. I told them I had served the Dominion for 31 years with complete commitment. I had never before doubted a standing order. I had, during the engagement at Orion Spur Sector 7, issued an unauthorized ceasefire that directly contradicted Fleet Admiral Draze's command, allowing a hostile vessel to escape an engagement that should have ended in capture or destruction. The panel chair, Prosecutor Aldrin, asked why I had done it. I had prepared for that question. I had rehearsed it in the transport, in detention, and in the hours after I gave the order while watching a battered destroyer vanish into a debris field under Draze's condemnation. I said, because I learned something from that crew that mattered more than destroying them. Aldrin asked, what did you learn? I said, this campaign is a mistake. Silence followed. I did not let it stretch. I have taken 3 civilizations, I continued. I have overseen the submission of 11 more. I have never lost a campaign. Not because I am exceptional, but because the Dominion method is effective against civilizations that respond to it. Broadcast. Wait. Advance. Submit. The method works because most civilizations, when confronted with us, calculate survival odds and adjust behavior accordingly. Aldrin said. And the Terran did not. No, I said. The Terran did not calculate the odds in the way we expected. They calculated what the odds revealed about us. I paused. I wanted the words to be precise. The commander of that vessel was not holding position because she believed she could win. She was holding position to observe what we would do when victory did not come quickly. She was testing us. The tribunal remained silent. She found what she was looking for, I said. We hesitated. We communicated. I communicated with her, and in doing so, I gave her exactly what she needed. Proof that we could be made uncertain. That a single vessel used correctly could buy time. Aldrin said, so you are saying she used your hesitation against you? Yes. And you gave her that hesitation? Yes. Why? I considered it. Because she earned it. That did not satisfy them. I did not expect it to. But it was the truth, and the tribunal had asked for truth, not comfort. Aldrin asked me to clarify. She placed a single ship between her people and a fleet, I said. Not because she believed she could stop us, but because she understood time as a weapon. She was willing to lose everything to create delay. I have never seen that before. In 31 years, I continued, I have never observed a commander fully remove survival from their decision-making process. Most commanders retain some internal reservation for themselves. She removed it entirely. I paused. When I saw that, I said, I stopped being certain we were correct. Aldrin said, correct about what? About this campaign, I said. About the Terran. about what we do when we encounter something that does not follow the expected pattern. I looked at the panel. We have a method. The method works. But it only works on species that do not have someone like her. And the Terrans do have her, and likely others like her. And if we continue this campaign assuming they will eventually behave like every species we have encountered before, then we will be wrong in ways that are very expensive. The campaign had, in fact, stalled. I knew it. The panel knew it. Everyone in the room knew it. The Endurance data package had reached Fleet Command, and Fleet Command had acted on it. Inner system defenses were repositioned. The Dominion's second advance, led by Drays after my removal, had already encountered 3 engagements in the outer system that cost more vessels than expected. Drays was still pushing, but she was pushing carefully now, cautiously, which was not her nature, and that alone told everyone watching that something had changed. 2 years passed. A campaign that was supposed to take 3 months had stretched into its 3rd year. The panel knew what my testimony would be used for. There were factions within the Dominion government now arguing for negotiation. The idea itself was almost without precedent. In 1,000 years, the Dominion had not negotiated a boundary. That was not part of the method. But the casualty reports existed. The stalled advance existed. And some within the council had begun to ask whether the method itself needed revision. My testimony was part of that argument. I did not know which way it would go. Aluldran asked me one final question. Whether, given the outcome and the cost, I regretted issuing the ceasefire that allowed the Enduring to escape. I thought about it honestly. Not for long. No, I said. He asked why. Because the order was correct, I said. I had information that the crew of that vessel had earned the right to survive, and I had information that their survival mattered beyond that engagement. I acted on that information. The fact that it ended my career does not change whether it was correct. He wrote something down. The panel wrote things down. The room remained quiet in the way administrative rooms become when a decision is already forming but not yet spoken. I was held for another 18 months. During that time, the Dominion entered preliminary boundary negotiations with the Terran Federation. It was the first negotiation of its kind in Dominion history. The talks were slow, careful, difficult, but they progressed. The Terran negotiators were organized, precise, and unafraid. They treated the process as an exchange between equals, which, from the Dominion perspective, was new in a way that was almost disorienting. I read reports indicating that the senior Terran negotiator had served during the outer system defense and had participated in several engagements during the second phase of the campaign. I never learned his name. I thought about Yara Collins sometimes. I wondered if she was in those rooms. If her voice had become part of what the Federation now was. I hoped it had. I was released after 2 years. Not exonerated. Released. The Dominion does not often admit error. It simply stops continuing it. I was returned my personal effects and assigned transport back to the inner systems. My service record was archived, not erased. An administrative compromise between removal and acknowledgement. On my final day, I requested access to astronomical records for the Orion Spur sector. The request was delayed for a day, which suggested someone had considered whether I should see it at all. That told me the sector now meant something. I looked at the star charts. I found the yellow star at the center of the Terran system. It was still there. Of course it was. Stars do not move in 2 years. But I needed to see it anyway. Not for logic. I did not interrogate that need. I thought about a debris field, a battered hull, a voice that had spoken as though it had already completed the calculations and found a different kind of certainty on the other side of them. I suggest you reconsider, it had said. I had reconsidered. Not immediately, not willingly, but it had happened. And it had led here, to this chart, this empty career, this ongoing campaign that no longer resembled what it had been meant to be. The Dominion would remove my commendations, erase my name from official accounts, attribute outcomes elsewhere. That was their method. I did not object, but the star remained. I had not placed it there. I had not preserved it. I had done almost nothing that day except hold position for reasons I could not fully explain. Then I had issued a ceasefire that lasted 5 minutes and cost me everything I had built. And yet the star still burned. Calmly, indifferently. Behind it, on a planet I would likely never see again, people were alive because a worn destroyer had been placed between them and a fleet, and because someone had asked that fleet, without fear or hesitation, to reconsider what it assumed about certainty. I closed the chart. I gathered my things. I walked toward the transport that would take me somewhere smaller than what I had known. And as I left, I understood something simple. There are worse failures than stopping. There are commanders who never think to.